At 11:42 that night, Elaine Harper opened the joint bank statement because her daughter's school had sent one last tuition reminder. Not the first reminder, the last one. The kind of email that does not sound emotional, but somehow makes a mother's stomach drop before she even finishes reading it. Earlier that same morning, Richard had sat across from her at the kitchen table. He had barely looked at the tuition notice before sliding it back toward her with 2 fingers, like it was something unpleasant she had brought into the house. Then he said, "We don't have money for Lily's tuition." By midnight, Elaine knew exactly where the money had gone. $8,000 had left their savings account that same day. The memo line was short, clean, almost polite. Dubai final balance. Vanessa. For a few seconds, Elaine just stared at the screen. Not because she did not understand it. She understood it too well. That was the problem. There it was. The number Richard claimed did not exist. The money their daughter needed. The money he said the family did not have. And beside it was another woman's name. Elaine printed the statement. Then she printed it again, because something in her wanted a second copy of the truth. She placed both pages inside a folder and closed it slowly. And in the quiet of that kitchen, with her husband sleeping down the hall, Elaine had one thought. If he could afford Dubai for her, he could afford court for me. If stories about betrayal, divorce, custody battles, and quiet justice speak to you, stay with this one. Because this was not just about an affair. This was about a man who made his own child feel expensive, while making another woman feel chosen. Elaine Harper was 51 years old, and she had spent most of her marriage being the part of the house nobody thanked because everybody assumed it would always work. She was the calendar, the reminder, the signature on the school form, the woman who knew when the insurance renewed, which bill came out on the 3rd Friday, which doctor needed a referral, which teacher preferred email, and which pharmacy still had Lily's medication when the regular one ran out. She knew Lily's class schedule, her exam weeks, her therapy appointments, her quiet moods, the signs that meant her daughter was overwhelmed but too proud to say it out loud. Elaine knew the exact week tuition was due, because Elaine knew everything that kept that family from falling apart. If something had to be paid, she found the money. If something had to be fixed, she made the call. If someone had to remember, it was usually Elaine. And if something had to be forgiven, somehow, that had become her job too. Richard Harper was 54. For a long time, Elaine truly believed he was still the man she had married. Hardworking, ambitious. Maybe proud, yes, but not cruel. Not careless. Not the kind of man who would look his daughter in the face and pretend there was no money while spending it somewhere else. He ran a small logistics consulting company. It sounded impressive when he described it at dinner parties. In real life, it was always one late invoice away from stress. At least, that was the version Elaine had been given. In the early years, she believed in that company almost as much as Richard did. Maybe more, if anyone was being honest. When cash flow got tight, Elaine covered groceries without making him feel small. When he needed time to land a client, she picked up extra hours. When payroll was short one winter, she used money from her own savings and never mentioned it in front of anyone. She delayed replacing her car because Richard said the company was close to turning a corner. She skipped trips to see her sister because travel felt irresponsible. She made their life look steady so Richard could keep walking into rooms like a man who had everything under control. That is the kind of loyalty people do not talk about enough. The quiet kind. The expensive kind. The kind that does not show up in photos, but holds a marriage together long after one person has stopped deserving it. That was why the change was hard for Elaine to see at first. Richard did not wake up one morning as a stranger. He changed slowly, small enough to explain away, small enough for Elaine to blame stress, age, business pressure, or one bad month bleeding into another. First, he became tired. Then he became distant. Then he became careful. Not careful with her heart, careful with his answers. Anytime Elaine brought up something the family needed, Richard made it sound like she was asking for too much. A dental bill, a car repair, Lily's school deposit, therapy copays, groceries that cost more every month. Somehow, every ordinary responsibility became proof that Elaine did not understand pressure. When Lily's tuition came up, Richard started using words that sounded practical on the surface, but felt cruel underneath. He said the school was too expensive. He said Lily could adjust to public school if Elaine stopped treating private education like a moral requirement. He said their daughter needed resilience, not special treatment. He said Elaine had to be realistic. He said he could not print money. Elaine listened because she wanted to believe her husband was struggling, not lying. There is a difference, and it took her too long to admit which one she was living with. So she did what she had always done. She made herself smaller. She stopped buying lunch at work and packed leftovers in the same plastic container she had owned for years. She postponed dental work and told herself it could wait until spring. She wore the same black winter coat another season, even though one sleeve had started to fray. She stopped looking at things for herself entirely, because wanting anything felt selfish when Lily's tuition was hanging over the house. Late at night, Elaine would open the school account and stare at the balance. She would calculate, recalculate, move numbers around in her head, and try to make impossible math behave. But Richard did not look like a man doing impossible math. That was the part her heart noticed before her mind was ready. New shirts started appearing in his closet, not expensive enough to raise an alarm by themselves, but too new for a man preaching sacrifice. His business trips became more frequent. He suddenly cared about luggage, about cologne, about whether a jacket looked client-facing. His phone stayed face down at dinner, close to his hand, like even a notification might betray him. Elaine kept telling herself he was under pressure, but pressure did not explain the perfume on his collar. Once she let herself notice one thing, the rest came in a flood. Richard was always saying money was tight, yet there were restaurant charges at places Elaine had never been. Not diners, not airport sandwiches. Quiet. Polished restaurants with wine lists and 2 entrees that cost more than a week of groceries. He said he was meeting clients, but one hotel receipt showed a room booked for 2 adults. He changed the password on his laptop and said it was for company security. He started taking phone calls in the garage, even in winter. He stopped leaving receipts in his jacket pockets. He became jumpy when Elaine walked into a room too quietly. And when she asked simple questions, He had a talent for making them sound insulting. He called her paranoid. He said she was spiraling over tuition. He told her she had become obsessed with controlling every dollar. Sometimes he would lean back in his chair, tired and disappointed, like she had wounded him by asking where their savings had gone. That was how Richard did it. He did not always deny. Sometimes he acted hurt. Sometimes he acted exhausted. Sometimes he made Elaine feel like a tired, unreasonable woman who could not understand how hard he was trying. And for a while, that worked. Because Elaine was not trying to catch him. She was trying to save her family. The worst part was how easily Richard performed the story in front of other people. At Sunday dinner with his mother, Lily was in the other room, and Elaine had barely said anything about school. Richard sighed into his coffee and said, "Elaine wants to keep Lily in that school because she cares too much about appearances." He said it softly, almost sadly. Like he was a patient husband married to a woman who could not accept reality. Elaine sat there with her fork in her hand and felt something inside her go cold. Because she was not the one chasing appearances. She was not the one buying new clothes for trips she never explained. She was not the one hiding restaurant bills under business expenses. She was not the one acting broke at home and generous somewhere else. But Richard had a gift for turning the truth around until it pointed at her. That was the pattern Elaine began to see. Whenever the family needed money, Richard became practical. When Lily needed tuition, Richard became strict. When Elaine needed honesty, Richard became offended. But when Richard needed to disappear for a weekend, money somehow appeared. When Richard needed a hotel, there was room in the budget. When Richard needed to impress someone Elaine had never met, suddenly the accounts had flexibility. Financial gaslighting does not always come with shouting. Sometimes it comes dressed as concern. Sometimes it sounds like maturity. Sometimes it is a husband telling his wife she is emotional because she wants to know why their child's future keeps getting treated like an optional expense. Then Lily's school sent the final reminder. And Richard said the sentence Elaine would remember long after she stopped loving him. Elaine printed the tuition email and placed it on the kitchen table after dinner. She waited until Lily had gone upstairs. She did not want their daughter hearing another conversation where her education sounded like a burden. Elaine kept her voice even. Not because she felt calm, because she still had a small, tired part of her that believed if she explained it clearly enough, Richard might remember who he was supposed to be. A father, a husband, a man with a daughter who was already anxious enough without being made to feel like a financial mistake. Richard barely looked at the paper. He glanced at it, exhaled through his nose, and said, "We don't have $8,000 sitting around." $8,000. The number did not leave the room after he did. It sat there, heavy, exact. Not some vague emergency, not a fantasy amount, not a luxury request. $8,000 was what Lily's school needed to keep her seat, her teachers, her routine, and the fragile stability Elaine had fought so hard to build for her. That night, Elaine opened the joint account. She told herself she was only looking for options. Maybe a forgotten transfer. Maybe a payment plan. Maybe some way to protect Lily without begging Richard one more time. Instead, she found the truth. Date, amount, memo. $8,000 had left their savings. It had not gone to Lily's school. It had gone to a travel agency. The memo read, Dubai, final balance, Vanessa. Elaine stared at the name longer than she stared at the money. Vanessa. Not a vendor she knew. Not a client Richard had ever mentioned. Not anyone connected to Lily, their home, or the life Richard claimed they could barely afford. Elaine opened the old family email account they had once used for bills, travel confirmations, and school forms. Richard had forgotten some receipts still forwarded there. There it was. A resort booking in Dubai. 2 guests, Richard Harper and Vanessa Lane. That was the moment Elaine understood the whole shape of it. Her husband was not out of money. He was out of decency. She printed the bank statement. She printed the resort booking. She printed the tuition reminder. Then she placed all 3 together in a folder and locked it inside the drawer of her desk. The next morning, Richard came into the kitchen with that familiar look on his face. Tired, annoyed, superior. Like he had already forgiven himself for a conversation Elaine was supposed to feel guilty about. He poured coffee, glanced at her, and asked, "Are you done being dramatic about tuition?" Elaine looked at him. This man had spent their daughter's school money on another woman's vacation and still expected to be treated like the reasonable one in the room. She said, "Yes, I'm done." Richard smiled a little. He thought that meant she had accepted it. He thought the argument was over. He thought he had won. What Richard did not understand was that Elaine had not surrendered. She had stopped asking, and she had started keeping records. Elaine did not call Richard's office. She did not call Vanessa. She did not ask Lily what she knew, because Lily was 16. And no child should have to become a witness before her mother has even found her balance. By Friday morning, Elaine was sitting across from Patricia Cole, a 58-year-old divorce attorney with silver hair, square glasses, and the kind of calm that makes a person lower their voice without being told to. Patricia did not rush her. She did not interrupt. She simply listened while Elaine placed the tuition reminder on the desk, then the bank statement, then the Dubai booking. 1 page at a time. 1 lie at a time. Patricia read the tuition email first. Then she read the transfer. Then she looked over the resort confirmation with Richard's name beside Vanessa's. She did not gasp. She did not act shocked. That was almost comforting. It told Elaine she was not the first woman to walk into that office with a folder full of betrayal and a face trying very hard not to fall apart. Patricia tapped the memo line once with her pen. "According to what you've shown me," she said, "in this state, the evidence may matter." That was the first useful sentence Elaine had heard in weeks. Not comforting. Useful. There is a difference. Comfort tells you it will be okay. Usefulness tells you what to do next. Patricia explained that Elaine had to stop thinking only like a betrayed wife, at least for a little while. She had to think like a woman protecting a child, a home, and the financial future Richard had been quietly gambling with. Her pain was real. Her anger was justified. But pain did not organize bank records. Anger did not subpoena business accounts. And heartbreak, by itself, did not protect Lily. So Elaine went home with instructions, and for the first time in months, she had something Richard had not given her: a plan. She began collecting everything she could legally access: joint bank statements, credit card records, school tuition notices, text messages where Richard said Lily's education was unaffordable, tax returns from the last 3 years, business account summaries she had access to because, once upon a time, Elaine had helped Richard build that company from their dining room table. That part almost made her laugh. But not because it was funny. She remembered sorting invoices beside him at midnight. She remembered buying printer ink with her own debit card because he said the company account was tight. She remembered bringing him coffee while he talked about how one day, when the business was stable, life would get easier for all of them. Funny how some men call it our dream while you are helping them build it. Then they call it my business when the money starts moving somewhere you were never meant to see. Elaine printed travel charges. She saved email confirmations. She copied old calendar entries. She pulled together proof of who took Lily to therapy, who handled school meetings, who signed permission forms, who waited in doctor's offices, and who knew the refill schedule for Lily's anxiety medication without having to ask. It was not dramatic work. It was not the kind of thing anyone writes love songs about. It was tedious. It was humiliating. It was ugly in that quiet, adult way betrayal becomes ugly after the first shock passes. No broken glass, no shouting in the street, just a woman at a desk, printing proof that the life she had trusted was not the life she had been living. And with every page, the story became clearer. Richard had not only spent $8,000 on Vanessa's Dubai trip. That was just the cleanest number. The easiest one to understand. The kind of number a judge could look at and immediately feel the insult in it. But beneath that transfer, there were smaller charges. Repeated charges. The kind that told a longer story. A hotel listed as client lodging. A dinner marked business development. Flowers buried under marketing gifts. Several payments to Vanessa Lane written off as consulting fees, even though Elaine could not find one contract connected to her name. Not one invoice. Not one project. Not one piece of work Vanessa had supposedly done for Richard's company. Vanessa had been paid like a vendor, treated like a girlfriend, and hidden like a liability. Then Patricia found the charge that changed the air in the room. A private DNA testing company. The payment had come out of Richard's business account. 2 weeks later, another payment went to a daycare center in Vanessa's neighborhood. Elaine stared at those two charges so long the words seemed to blur, then sharpen, then blur again. Patricia did not need to say it right away. Elaine understood. Vanessa was not just a mistress. Vanessa had a little boy. 2 years old. Richard had quietly paid for a DNA test for that child, while telling his own daughter there was no money for school. Some betrayals hit like a slap. This one did not. This one settled on Elaine like weight. It pressed into her ribs. It made the office feel smaller. It made every memory she had been trying to keep gentle turn cold around the edges. She thought about Lily sitting at the kitchen table, trying to act like she was not scared of losing her school. She thought about Richard telling their daughter they would figure something out, while his money had already figured out a different life. She thought about how often men like Richard use the word responsibility only when they are trying to avoid it. Patricia let the silence sit for a moment. Then she slid a yellow legal pad toward Elaine. "Write down what he actually does as a father," Patricia said. "Not what he says, what he does." That sentence mattered. Because when Richard realized Elaine had spoken to an attorney, he changed almost overnight. Suddenly, he wanted 50-50 custody. Suddenly, he cared about father-daughter dinners. Suddenly, he asked Lily how school was going, with a little too much volume in his voice, as if the walls themselves needed to hear him being a good father. Suddenly, the man who forgot therapy appointments wanted to talk about stability. Elaine watched it happen with a kind of tired disbelief. Richard had never been cruel to Lily in obvious ways. That would have been too easy to name. His damage was quieter. He forgot things. He arrived late. He acted supportive when someone was watching, then disappeared when the work got boring. He loved the idea of being seen as a father. Elaine had done most of the fathering that required a calendar. Patricia understood the custody move immediately. 50-50 custody gave Richard a better image. It also gave him a chance to argue over child support. He was not asking for more time because his conscience had finally woken up. He was asking because the math had found him. Elaine did not argue with him about it. That was new for her. In the old marriage, she would have corrected him. She would have reminded him of the appointments he missed, the school nights he skipped, the birthdays he left early, the morning he forgot to pick Lily up and then blamed Elaine for not texting him twice. Now, she simply wrote it down. Who drove Lily to school? Who met her teachers? Who paid for therapy? Who knew which mornings were hardest for her? Who stayed home when she was sick? Who signed the school forms? Who knew her medication schedule? Who sat with her when she cried in the car because she believed her father saw her education as an expense instead of a future? That was when the story changed. Elaine was no longer only a woman with a broken heart. She was a woman with a folder, a lawyer, and a timeline. And Richard still thought she was only sad. That was his mistake. For the next 2 weeks, Elaine lived in two worlds. In one world, she went to work. She answered calls at the clinic. She smiled at patients who had no idea she had spent the night before sorting through bank records. She made dinner. She asked Lily about homework. She nodded when Richard complained about cash flow as if he were still the victim of bad timing and an expensive family. In the other world, the marriage had already ended. Elaine opened a separate account for a paycheck under Patricia's guidance. She made copies of every important document and kept them outside the house. She stopped arguing about tuition because she had already paid the deposit from a small emergency fund Richard had always dismissed as unnecessary. She did not tell him. Not yet. Richard mistook her quiet for defeat. Men like him often do. They think a quiet woman has run out of strength. Sometimes she has only run out of warnings. Then Elaine found the ring. Not in a drawer. Not in his jacket pocket. Not tucked into the back of a closet like some guilty little secret. She found it in the company credit card statement, hidden under the label Client Gift. The amount was too high to ignore. The merchant name was too familiar. It was the same jeweler Richard had used years earlier when he bought Elaine an anniversary bracelet. Back when guilt still came wrapped in velvet and apologies still came with ribbons. Patricia's office requested the receipt. When it came through, Elaine read the item description and felt something in her stomach turn over. Engagement ring. 2 words. That was all it took to finish the picture. Richard was not only taking Vanessa to Dubai, he was planning to propose there, after Elaine had been pushed toward divorce. After Lily had been told her school was too expensive. After years of Elaine making his life look more stable than it really was, he wanted a clean ending for himself. That was what made it so ugly. He wanted Elaine to be the tired wife who could not accept change. He wanted to be the brave man starting over. He wanted Vanessa in a resort, a new ring, a new story, and no one asking too many questions about whose money paid for the beginning. A sad wife, a reasonable father, a new woman, a polished little lie. The night before his flight, Richard packed in the bedroom with the door half open. He moved around like a man already halfway out of the house, folding shirts Elaine had not seen before and placing them neatly into a suitcase. He told Lily the trip was for work. He kissed the top of her head and said they would figure something out about school when he came back. Lily nodded, but Elaine saw her daughter's shoulders tighten. That was the moment the last piece of Elaine's hesitation disappeared. After Lily went upstairs, Elaine placed a large envelope on the kitchen table. Richard looked at it the way he looked at every bill he did not want to pay. Tired, annoyed, prepared to dismiss it. Inside were the bank statement showing the $8,000 transfer, the Dubai booking, the ring receipt, the DNA test charge, the daycare payment, Patricia's letter, and a copy of the divorce filing. Richard's face changed page by page. At first, he looked irritated, then confused, then careful, then afraid. Elaine did not raise her voice. She did not need to. A raised voice would have given him something to criticize. She kept it plain. "You can still go to Dubai," she said. "But when you come back, you won't have a wife, a clean bank account, or a story anyone believes." For the first time in months, Richard did not have a polished answer ready. He tried to say Vanessa was a client. Elaine pointed to the resort booking. He tried to say the ring was a business gift. Elaine pointed to the jeweler's receipt. He tried to say the DNA test was not what it looked like. Elaine told him that was a sentence for his attorney, not for her kitchen. Then she told him what had already been done. Patricia had filed for temporary financial protection to stop him from draining the joint accounts. A forensic accountant would be reviewing the business records. Elaine's custody filing included Lily's real schedule, not Richard's new version of fatherhood. The tuition deposit had been paid, and the court would see exactly why Elaine had to handle it alone. That was the moment Richard finally understood the difference between silence and surrender. Elaine had not been waiting for him to confess. She had been building the case. Richard still got on the plane. Maybe pride made him do it. Maybe Vanessa did. Maybe he still believed the trip would prove he was in control of something. But this time, Dubai was not a reward. It was the last receipt. When Richard came back from Dubai, the house did not feel like his anymore. That was the first thing he noticed. Not because the furniture had changed, not because Elaine had made a scene, The rooms were still the same rooms. The kitchen still had the same narrow drawer that always stuck when someone pulled it too fast. Lily's school bag still sat by the hallway bench. The clock over the stove still ticked a little too loudly when the house was quiet. But something had shifted. Richard walked in with a suitcase full of expensive lies, and for the first time, there was no place for him to put them. The joint account was no longer a private wallet he could dip into and explain later. His attorney had messages waiting from Patricia. The business records he had always kept cloudy were being requested in detail. Elaine had moved her things out of the primary bedroom. Not dramatically. Not with a pile of clothes in the hallway. Just cleanly, quietly. Like a woman who had already left before her body followed. And Lily knew enough. Not every ugly detail. Elaine did not hand her daughter a stack of papers and make her carry adult pain. But Lily knew. Her father had said there was no money for her tuition, while money had gone somewhere else. She knew he had lied. She knew her mother had paid the school deposit. And she knew that sometimes the person who says, "We will figure it out," is really hoping someone else will figure it out for them. That hurt Richard more than the legal letters, not because he suddenly understood Lily's pain. That would have required him to look at someone besides himself for more than a moment. It hurt because his image had cracked. Richard could survive Elaine being angry. He had spent years learning how to make her anger look unreasonable. He could survive relatives asking questions. He knew how to sigh, lower his voice, and say marriage was complicated. But his daughter looking at him differently, that was harder to perform through. Still, Richard tried. In court, he brought the version of the story he had been rehearsing in his head since the night Elaine put that envelope on the kitchen table. Elaine was unstable. Elaine was jealous. Elaine was obsessed with tuition. Elaine could not accept that the marriage had changed. Elaine wanted to punish him for moving forward. He talked about pressure. He talked about business stress. He talked about wanting to be an active father. He used the word stability more than once, which might have meant more if he had not ignored so much of Lily's actual life until the custody schedule became useful to him. Patricia let him talk. That was the kind of lawyer she was. She did not interrupt the man while he was building his own cage. She sat still, took a note here and there, and waited until Richard had filled the room with enough words to make the documents feel even heavier. Then she opened the folder. The judge saw the tuition reminder first. Then Richard's message saying they did not have the money. Then the transfer for exactly $8,000. Then the memo line. Dubai, final balance. Vanessa. Then the resort booking for 2 guests. Then the payments to Vanessa Lane, labeled as consulting. Then the ring, marked as a client gift. Then the DNA testing charge. Then the daycare payment. Then the school records, the therapy logs, the appointment confirmations, Elaine's calendar, the emails from teachers. The name that appeared again and again whenever Lily needed someone. Elaine Harper. Richard's face did not collapse all at once. That would have been too simple. It changed slowly. First annoyance, then disbelief, then calculation. Then the pale, stiff look of a man realizing charm has no place to stand when paper is doing the talking. He said Vanessa was connected to the business. Patricia asked for a contract. There was none. He said the Dubai trip involved client development. Patricia showed the resort details. No conference. No meeting schedule. No business itinerary. Just flights, a luxury booking, and 2 adults in a place he had told his family he could not afford to send his daughter to school from. He said the engagement ring was a client gift. Patricia asked why a client gift had been purchased from a jeweler known for bridal pieces, and why no client name appeared on the receipt. Richard had no clean answer. He said the DNA test was personal and irrelevant. Patricia did not argue the morality of it. She brought it back to the money. Company funds. Hidden payments. A pattern of spending that contradicted every claim Richard had made about being broke. Then Richard tried custody. That was the part that made Elaine's hands tighten in her lap. He said Lily needed both parents equally. He said Elaine had always controlled the schedule. He said he wanted to be more involved, but had been pushed aside. He made himself sound like a father locked outside the life of his own child. Patricia showed the records. Teacher emails answered by Elaine. Therapy appointments scheduled by Elaine. Medication refills handled by Elaine. School conferences attended by Elaine. Early pickups signed by Elaine. Late arrivals explained by Elaine. Richard had not been pushed aside. He had stepped aside whenever the work became ordinary, and now he wanted credit for showing up to court in a suit. The consequences were not theatrical. There was no sudden thunderclap. No one gasped. No judge slammed a gavel like a movie. It was worse than that for Richard. It was real. His claimed income was questioned. Child support was recalculated based on what the forensic accountant found moving through the company. Temporary spousal support was discussed. The money spent on Vanessa became part of the argument over marital waste. The judge ordered deeper financial disclosure. Records Richard had treated like private shadows now had to be brought into the light. And light is not kind to men who have been living by shadows. His business partner found out that company funds had been used in ways Richard could not explain cleanly. That partnership cracked almost immediately. Not with a dramatic shouting match, from what Elaine later heard. More like a door closing. Quiet. Professional. Final. Clients began to hear enough to hesitate. Richard had always sold himself as steady, reliable, careful with other people's money. Once the story around him changed, that image did not hold the way it used to. Vanessa did not stay long after that. That part was almost predictable, though Richard seemed shocked by it. The man who had promised Dubai freedom and a beautiful new life was suddenly a man with restricted accounts, legal bills, a damaged business, and a daughter who knew he had chosen another woman's vacation over her education. Vanessa had wanted the polished version, the confident version, the man with upgrades, resorts, and promises. She was less interested in the version answering questions about daycare payments, DNA charges, and missing business funds. Funny how fast romance becomes practical when the money stops flowing. Richard's family found out too. Not from Elaine. She did not need to call his mother and explain herself. She did not need to gather people and make a speech. The documents did what gossip never could. They made denial look foolish. That was the part Richard hated most. Elaine had not ruined him with rumors. She had not chased Vanessa. She had not posted his bank records online. She had not shouted in front of neighbors or tried to turn their daughter into a weapon. She had let the records speak in complete sentences. After the temporary hearing, Richard called her from a number she had not blocked yet. Elaine almost did not answer. Then she did, because some endings need to be heard once, if only to remind you why they are endings. His voice was rough, angry, smaller than she remembered. The confidence was still there, in pieces, but it had cracks all through it now. He said, "You destroyed my life." Elaine stood in her quiet kitchen, looking at Lily's tuition receipt pinned to the refrigerator. For years, she had explained, defended, softened, covered, forgiven. She had made excuses for a man who was always very careful to save his best excuses for himself. This time, she did not give him one. She said, "No, I documented what you did with it." Then she ended the call. That was the punishment Richard never expected. Not revenge, not a scene, not a wife begging for a confession, not a woman crying in the driveway, asking why she had not been enough. Just the truth, organized neatly enough that everyone could finally read it. Elaine did not rebuild her life overnight. People like to imagine freedom as a door flying open. But most of the time, it is slower than that. It is waking up without checking someone else's mood before you breathe. It is paying a bill and knowing no hidden charge is waiting behind it. It is making dinner without wondering what lie is sitting across from you at the table. She and Lily moved into a smaller townhouse. Nothing fancy. Narrow stairs. Older cabinets. A little patch of yard out back where Lily put 2 chairs and called it their summer patio, even when it was barely big enough for a grill. But it was peaceful. That mattered more than space. Lily stayed in her school. The tuition was no longer treated like a burden Elaine had to beg for. It was handled through the court order, through a clearer financial plan, and eventually through Elaine's own hard work. Because Elaine changed too. At the clinic, she started taking on more responsibility. At first, it was because she needed the money. Then it became something else. Competence has a way of returning to a woman once she is no longer spending half her energy surviving someone else's selfishness. She accepted a promotion she had once been too exhausted to even consider. Within a year, Elaine was managing 2 offices instead of 1. She was earning more than she ever had during the marriage. Not rich, not suddenly glamorous, just secure in a way that felt almost sacred. She could pay Lily's school expenses without asking Richard for permission. She could look at her daughter and say, "You are covered." That was the freedom Richard never understood. It was not luxury. It was not revenge. It was not proving she could live without him. Though she could, it was the simple, powerful relief of no longer waiting for a selfish man to decide whether fatherhood fit his budget. Daniel became part of that peace slowly. He was a single father Elaine met through the school. He was not loud, not flashy, not the kind of man who needed every small act of decency turned into applause. The first time Lily needed help carrying boxes for a school fundraiser, Daniel showed up on time. He carried them. He joked with Lily about how books somehow weighed more when they were donated. Then he left without making the moment about himself. Later, when he and Elaine had coffee, he paid for his own, and did not turn basic consideration into a performance. That sounds like a small thing, until you have lived with a person who made every dollar a weapon. Daniel did not rescue Elaine. She did not need rescuing, but he supported her. He fixed a broken shelf without acting like he had rebuilt the house. He sat with her on hard evenings and did not make her feel like her life was too heavy. He listened when Lily talked about school. He respected the custody schedule. He showed up without trying to own the space he had been invited into. Elaine was not rushing into love. She had learned too much for that. But she noticed something. She could sit across from Daniel and feel calm. Not managed, not drained, not measured against what she could provide. Just calm. Richard, meanwhile, lost more than he expected. The forensic accounting damaged his business. His partner walked away. Clients stopped trusting the version of him he had worked so hard to sell. Legal fees drained the money he had tried to hide. The job offers he expected did not come the way they used to. Vanessa left when the lifestyle disappeared. In the end, Richard lost the money, the work, the woman, and the family he had treated like an obligation. Elaine did not celebrate his downfall. She was too busy building something better. That was the part people like Richard never understand. They think the final victory is watching them suffer. It is not. The final victory is when their suffering no longer controls the temperature of your life. Richard had $8,000 for Dubai, but not for his daughter's tuition. In the end, the court did not need a speech from Elaine. It only needed his bank records. And Elaine did not need his money to survive. She needed the truth to set her free. If this story made you think of someone who only becomes broke when family needs them, leave your thoughts below. And if you want more stories about betrayal, divorce, custody battles, evidence, karma, and quiet justice, subscribe. Sometimes justice does not shout. Sometimes it waits until the right folder is opened.